The CRTC wants to know how radio, TV, and digital platforms in Canada can best meet the needs of Indigenous viewers, listeners, and content creators. Join the conversation today at crtc.gc.ca/indigenous-broadcasting.
A message from the Government of Canada.
Le CRTC veut savoir comment la radio, la télévision et les plateformes numériques au Canada peuvent mieux répondre aux besoins des spectateurs, auditeurs et créateurs de contenu autochtones. Joignez-vous à la conversation aujourd'hui au crtc.gc.ca/radiodiffusion-union autochtone.
Un message du gouvernement du Canada.
I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Friday, May 24th. We begin with new research from the University of Western Ontario, which has found that a paper mill's wastewater intensified mercury contamination of the English Wabigoon River, located near the Grassy Narrows First Nation. Researchers detected heightened levels of methylmercury, the most toxic form of mercury, within sediment, water, and fish. And although the Dryden Paper Mill stopped using mercury in 1975, members of Grassy Narrows continue to face significant health issues, with over 90% of its population displaying symptoms of mercury poisoning. Researcher Dr. Brian Branforan hopes the findings will prompt action by the province.
What my hope is that now that we have this scientific information and this has been demonstrated clearly, that it's taken seriously. And there's no question in my mind that these discharges are worsening the mercury problem in the river currently. And it's not a solution to the whole problem because the mercury levels in the river are still exceptionally high. And that needs to be cleaned up too. But if we turn down the heat on the process that's forming methylmercury, then we can bring down mercury levels in fish relatively quickly.
To Saskatchewan, where a woman who won bail after 3 decades in custody for a second-degree murder conviction is back behind bars. Narissa Kwewizance is now in the Pine Grove Correctional Center following breaches of 2 bail conditions. Back in 1993, she and sister Odelia Kwewizance were both arrested in the death of a farmer in Kamsack. Prior to their release on bail last year, both sisters saw their day parole revoked due to drug violations and failure to report to parole officers. Kim Baudin is National Vice Chief with the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. He says the system sets people up to fail.
She does not need to go back to prison. She needs programming. She needs to go to a treatment center, a healing lodge.
To Ottawa, and a report presented to the House of Commons Thursday by the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. A report which calls for immediate reopening of the Elver fishery. One fisheries minister, Diane Laboussiere, cancelled this year over cited safety and conservation concerns. Meanwhile, Mi'kmaq Senator Paul Prosper still waits on a third-party independent review of the actions of fishery officers who, back in March, stranded 2 Mi'kmaq fishers 2 hours from home without shoes or a phone after allegedly harvesting elvers, also known as baby eels. Meanwhile, another incident involved DFO officers pulling over, then macing a Mi'kmaq person on suspicion of transporting elvers. Prosper says DFO officers must be held accountable.
In order to proceed forward, there's a need to have a keen understanding of the underlying facts, and something that you can only get through an appropriate independent investigation. I think it's the independent aspect of the investigation, I think, is quite key. You essentially don't want DFO to investigate itself.
More news in a moment.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, host of Face to Face. Coming up on our next episode, we'll be taking a look back at some of our favorite moments as we wrap up Season 10 of the show. Our guests will include MMIWG advocates, actors and filmmakers, and even a sitting premier. Tune in Tuesday on APTN or listen to the Face to Face podcast. Download and subscribe on your favorite player.
The president of the Métis National Council won't seek re-election, and Cassidy Caron made the announcement Thursday. She says after 3 years in the position, it's time to move on. Caron also says she's pregnant and wanted to announce early enough to give candidates time to step forward. The election for MNC president will be held September 26th in Saskatoon. Caron says the current controversy over Bill C-53, the federal Métis self-government legislation, did not play into her decision to not seek re-election.
As many people will know, the Métis Nation has been fighting for generations, amongst themselves with the Government of Canada. We are a fighting people. It has been challenging, of course, to find ways to unite Métis people during this time. However, I'm proud of the work that we've done to unite our Métis governments, to unite a lot of Métis people through, stories and events that have taken place in the last 3 years.
The federal Conservatives used yesterday's question period to attack the Liberal government on affordability. It came after new poverty report cards by Food Banks Canada, which show how the high cost of living and housing have pushed more people under the poverty line.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the homelessness and hunger. He doubled the debt, increased taxes, and caused inflation, but said it was all to fund generous programs that would end homelessness. Well, homelessness is now up 38%, and a quarter of Canadians are skipping meals because they can't afford them. That's because his greedy government is consuming everything Canadians earn. Why is the NDP and Liberals forcing Canadians to feed this morbidly obese government instead of feeding their families?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives who purport to care about poverty and Canadians when every single time they vote against those supports, $10 a day childcare, early learning and childhood education. They're not supporting our budgetary measures to put food in school lunchboxes for 400,000 children, Mr. Speaker. It's unbelievable that they will at one hand say they support Canadians and on the other hand vote against those supports every single time. Thank you, Mr.
And Food Banks Canada says 1 in 10 Canadians now live in poverty, a number up substantially from just a few years ago. And finally, the Yellowknife Supreme Court has delivered its sentence in the murder of 22-year-old Dene woman Brianna Menaco, a life sentence minus a credit for each day on remand, making Devon Larrabee eligible for parole in 6 years. Justice David Gates says the 11 victim impact statements had a profound effect on the court, and that 4 years after her death, a deep sense of sadness remains. A pre-sentence report showed Gladue factors played heavily in the sentence hearing of Larrabee, who admitted to Menaco's murder in 2020. The judge told Larrabee he had done a terrible, terrible thing, an act he'd have to live with for the rest of his life. Crown lawyer Blair McPherson.
The murder of Brianna Menaco was a great tragedy. Its circumstances are violent and shocking. Today, the court handed down a life sentence with no parole eligibility for 10 years. This was the recommendation of the parties. In our view, this was a fit and fair outcome.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Friday, May 24th. I'm Rick Harp.